Well, hi everybody, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to tonight's Joe Chaffee Weather Show on the 18th of September 2019. And I just have to comment, I guess when I started doing these live streams, I don't know, I think going back to I think they go back to 2016 or 2015. I never envisioned having so many people gathering for chats before the show started. And that happens every night. Usually led by Scott Briller, the chairman, who was the first to hit Super Chat tonight, by the way, and we thank you very much for that. But it's become a regular union meeting here with Johnny Quest, Chuck Cardillo, Robert Brown, Tim Smart, and Dave Schwartz is here tonight. I see Johnny Quest here. Let's leave anybody out. There's probably a few folks that are here on most nights, but not. But I think it's great, and I'm having the best time. You know, I get in the chat every once in a while, so early on, depending on whether I have my hands full or not ahead of time. So I certainly encourage any of you new arrivals to be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel by hitting the subscribe button, and you can do that with your Gmail account, of course. And you can jump in on the chat at any time. And by the way, I did include a link in there somewhere in the pre-chat. I did stumble onto a very interesting piece today that had listings and copies of newspapers going back to the 1960s. And the basic theme was all the apocalypses that have been predicted along the way, and how none of them have come to pass, including one by a Dr. Paul Ehrlich, who actually in the late 1960s had predicted a famine so horrific across the world that basically most of the world would be wiped out by the time we got to the year 2000. And he actually recommended putting sterilizing agents in food staples and in the water supply to keep people from having more children. So I just kind of found that hilarious, because when you see how these articles are framed in newspapers, they are written, and they are written with no challenges to them. There's no opposing scientists saying, "Hey, wait a minute, your numbers are wrong," or we don't see it quite that way. But just basically to bring you to the next apocalyptic conclusion. And I also put this in reference to the fact of certain people saying that apparently I just heard today that Miami is going to cease to exist in a couple of years. So I thought that was just kind of interesting. So the link is there in the chat. Just take a look at it and have a good laugh. I just thought it was funny. So speaking of the ongoing apocalypses, let's take a look at all the weather that's going on tonight. As we on this channel do not necessarily take things to their natural apocalyptic conclusion. Just bear that in mind. We keep things sensible around here. Okay, so we have Humberto, which is right now lashing Bermuda. Hamilton, Bermuda has hurricane force gusts. On the last observation that I looked at, they were gusting to 82 miles an hour. We're going to take a look at that. And we are also going to look at Imelda, which was a tropical storm that probably lasted maybe a couple of hours yesterday before it moved inland. And it formed just as quickly off the Texas coast. But now, as sometimes happens with these weak systems, they actually maintain a rather impressive a signature on the satellite, and they're drawing tropical moisture here out of the Gulf of Mexico. And we've seen already some places getting up to over a foot of rain in parts of southeast Texas and into southwest Louisiana. So we're going to take a look at that. We're going to look at Tropical Storm Jerry, which is getting stronger east of the Leeward Islands. And we have tropical storm watches that are up for St. Martin, both the French side and the Dutch side, and for St. Bartholomew, those two islands in the northern Leeward Islands under a tropical storm watch, because Jerry may actually pass close to the northern leewards. It's likely to go north of the northern leewards Friday morning, but it will probably come close enough that on the south side, we may see tropical storm force winds extend down to some of those islands, but I don't think it's going to be a direct hit based on the path that we're seeing. So the other thing I want to talk about is the beautiful air that is in the northeast down into the mid-Atlantic states, and that dry air is pushing southward through the Carolinas and into Georgia over the next couple of days. Thanks to Humberto out to the east and this big upper trough that is pushing southward, it produced a little bit of coastal cloudiness today, but it was no worse than partly sunny where I was. And if you went inland, it was basically mostly sunny for another terrific day. But temperatures in many areas didn't get out of the 60s. We have frost and freeze warnings up for a large chunk of northern New England. Many areas are going to be down in the 20s tomorrow morning from northeastern New York across northern New England, most of Vermont, New Hampshire, and through much of Maine. So the summer season is transitioning into autumn. It's not going to be an even transition. It seldom is. There will be warm-ups like the one that's coming this weekend for the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast that will take temperatures well up into the 80s in some places. But then we'll have the next cold front that will be arriving on Monday. The other thing, by the way, in all of this is how bone dry everything is. We have not seen much rain at all in the last week, nor will we see any rain at least through Sunday for much of the eastern U.S., especially east of the Appalachians. So looking at the watches and warnings map, the green that you see in East Texas and Southeast Texas and the western counties of Louisiana, those are all flash flood watches because of the remnant tropical depression that is Imelda. We also have a small area of flood watches up in southwestern Iowa. Then you see all the frost and freeze advisories and warnings from northeastern New York across Vermont, New Hampshire, and in Maine, particularly in northern Maine, where temperatures are definitely going to go below 32. So again, summer is done, fall coming, and we're going to start to see more and more of this stuff. You snow lovers out there are probably salivating already. Now, the WPC's 7-day rainfall forecast map, which I have said many times is probably one of the more useful tools. These guys do a pretty good job to figure out a general rainfall pattern for the next 7 days. You'll notice the area still indicating at a large area of 5 to 10 inch rains in East Texas and in westernmost Louisiana. Now, obviously, much of this is front-end loaded. It does not include what has already fallen. So we're talking about some places here getting 20 inches of rain or more before this is all said and done. These systems that come inland like this, sometimes they just slow to an absolute crawl. And I mentioned Tropical Storm Allison back in 2001, which up until Hurricane Harvey was the one storm a lot of folks in this area would point to as the 500-year flood storm. And then Harvey came along and, well, kind of changed that a bit, or at least made it another 500-year flood in less than 20 years. But Allison was really a nothing special tropical storm that came inland, but it just started to move, just basically crawl, and that created a long duration rainfall. We're also going to see big rains from Kansas across Missouri into Illinois and Indiana, also in these areas on the order of 5 inches or more over the next 7 days. And some of that has to do with that tropical moisture advecting northward. We're seeing some Pacific tropical moisture coming up through Mexico and in through Arizona, where you see a large area of 5 to 10 inch rainfalls being indicated for that particular state. Now, you don't often see that. Plus, we're going to have troughing that's going to eventually develop in the west. So the western part of the United States getting much more active in terms of rainfall amounts. It's not evenly spread, but you are seeing patchy areas showing up to several inches to fall over the next 7 days. Also through parts of the Dakotas and into the lakes, and in interior areas of the Northeast. But a large portion from the area from about New York City down to the Florida Panhandle, forecast not to see a drop of rain in some of these areas over the next 7 days. And those that are even on the edge, we're talking about basically a tenth of an inch or a quarter of an inch or less. So it also, one of the things we can guess from this map is that as far as additional rains from any kind of tropical systems, WPC is indicating that this is not going to be the case. So if we are going to see Jerry moving west-northwest, it seems like it is likely to recurve before it becomes problematic, nor are we seeing anything coming out of the Caribbean or Gulf of Mexico at this point that is headed northwestward. We could always wind up with a last-minute surprise, of course, but at this stage, from what's in front of us, it doesn't appear that there are any big issues here with regards to tropical systems making landfalls in the next week or so. Let's hope that that is the case. Now, here's the U.S. satellite view tonight. And you can see Humberto out to the east. And if you look at the circulation of Humberto, also watch as we go to sunset. It might be a little easier to see, but there are some lower clouds that are moving southwestward off the New England coast. So that's part of that upper trough that is swung down. It was responsible for taking Humberto out to the east-northeast. And it's now pulling it more north-northeast over the next overnight and for tomorrow. So it it guarantees that the center of the hurricane is going to pass north and west of Bermuda. It's close enough to Bermuda where they're seeing hurricane force winds and certainly hurricane force gusts, as we already have those. But the core of the hurricane will stay just barely offshore. And you'll notice, by the way, and I'll give a closer look at this, there is disturbed weather that's down in the Caribbean, south of the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. That is a rather large area of thunderstorms that's developed there. The trough that extends south from Humberto is having some impact because you see the clouds down there are blowing south to north. So the upper air wind's not especially favorable for development. But you do see the trail of the feeder that comes up from off the Atlantic, coming out of the Caribbean, off the Atlantic, and then getting sort of wrapped around Humberto, which is also, I believe, and there's a reconnaissance aircraft that's going there now that will check this out. But I think we've seen it already reach its peak in terms of intensity. The eye is no longer, it's there, the center is there, but the eye is no longer visible. It's become cloud filled. It did that this afternoon. So I think we're going to see the top winds come down a bit, and we may also see the gales spread out a bit more. And we see the signature in Texas of that depression, with part of the circulation still sitting over the Gulf of Mexico. So you're bringing that moisture inland, and actually, when you look at it, it's well defined for a tropical system that is inland. It has held its own quite well, and no shocker with respect to the fact that we've got so much rain that's occurring out of this. There's some cloud cover down in parts of the Appalachians down through Georgia right now. That's just sort of the leading edge of that drier air that's working its way down the coast, and it extends down into parts of Florida. We've got dry air up through the Rockies and in through most of the plain states today. That's going to change with this trough that you see coming into the Pacific Northwest. So definitely getting things moving in the atmosphere, but at least as far as the east is concerned, we are still in the sweet spot with regards to all the dry air. And our nice weather is going to continue, starting with, of course, tonight, with the cool temperatures that we're going to see for tonight. But let's run through Humberto and the tropical systems, and then we're going to come back to the forecast and where we're going to go with all this. So I pulled up the observation map I use much of the time. And Hamilton right now just had a wind. The wind was south-southwest. It looks like it's now gone southwest. They are 67 gusting to 86 miles an hour there, with zero visibility, light rain shower, and blowing spray, with a 1,500-foot ceiling. That's windy. 58 knots, gusting to 75 knots. 67 gusting to 86 with a temperature of 72. There was a buoy well out to the east that had a northwest wind didn't report apparently, but it would have at least given you an idea of where the circulation of this thing is. In the meantime, let's go back to the coastline. We've got some coastal flood advisories that are posted in a few places. I want to just double check on something here. I don't always remember what color represents what. The lighter green, I'm thinking, is a coastal flood. The darker green is a coastal flood statement, and the lighter green is a coastal flood advisory. So that's what we have up at the moment. So we've got some coastal flood advisories and coastal flood statements for parts of Chesapeake Bay, and also for parts of the Albemarle, Pamlico, and Albemarle Sounds on the west side of the Outer Banks. We'll probably see coastal flood statements and advisories possible further up the coast over the next couple of days. The waves have not yet reached the Jersey shore or the Long Island shore. But now that Humberto is moving north of 35 degrees north, we are going to see the waves pick up tomorrow, along with rip currents and very rough seas up and down from the mid-Atlantic states up at least through southern New England. Temperatures right now, this is as of 7:20, already down in the upper 40s and low 50s across Maine and parts of and into New Hampshire and Vermont. It's low to mid 50s there, but it's pretty chilly already when you take a look at some of these numbers that are showing up in a few places, like the oh boy, I would have to pick one that I would have a Seboys River near Shin Pond, okay, is 48. Knowles Corner, now that I can say, 47 there. At Danforth, it's 49. Down further south at Brownville is 47. And Greenville is at 49. So already pretty chilly here, and a lot of these areas are going to bottom out in the upper 20s and low 30s by morning for the first frosts and freezes of the season. So the growing season is coming to an end in northern New England. And frost advisories actually extend fairly far south now into Massachusetts. Parts of Massachusetts on the east side of the Berkshires. Orange Municipal Airport, 55. Worcester right now at 52. And I'm thinking that Sandusfield in Massachusetts there at 51. And you see these upstate New York temperatures like at Glens Falls at 57 right now. And, oh boy, Mount Van Hovenberg is 50, and Saranac Lake, which a lot of times can be one of the coldest spots in upstate New York, is sitting at 48. So here's our eastern satellite loop tonight. And you can see, obviously, Humberto is out to the east. The eye is gone, and it's getting ready to move north of 35 degrees north. You also can see the clouds off the New England coast that are moving northeast to southwest. Those are separate. Those lower clouds are separate from the higher cloud tops that are with the hurricane, and that's that upper trough that has come down. And all of the clouds up and down the eastern seaboard are basically blowing from north to south. So it gives you a really good idea of just how far south and how this trough in the eastern part of the United States is having such impact. Now here's Imelda's remnants on the wide radar view. A lot of downpours and thunderstorms in southeastern Texas and in southwestern Louisiana, and there's actually a band that goes well out to the east, not quite to New Orleans, but almost touching Baton Rouge, and then extending northwestward from there. And you can still see the rotation, by the way, on the loop. There's some other storms on the Florida Panhandle, and you see those are actually moving northeast to southwest, and they extend all the way down south of Tampa and Port Charlotte down to Sarasota. Those are moving also from northeast to southwest. Obviously, the radars in the northeast are from Maine down through almost through the northern half of Georgia are utterly silent, other than a couple of showers just off the Outer Banks. You've got some showers and storms in West Texas, and you can see a little bit of activity as we make our way up through the Plains and Rockies. And actually, from the standpoint of rain showers, rather busy here from Northern California, with a few embedded thunderstorms in there too, running up through Washington and Oregon and in through Idaho. This trough that's going to be trying to come into the west is actually going to keep things a bit on the cool side. All right, let's get back to the Imelda radars, because I got this one from Houston, and you can see there's some really heavy thunderstorms there that have just passed through Houston and moving toward the coastline. They're moving southeast, and they extend southwestward down to Victoria. But as you head up toward Beaumont and Port Arthur, and on the Louisiana side in Lake Charles, a fairly wide coverage here of the radar echoes, and then back up to Lake Charles, where we have a pretty loaded radar here as well. And on the local radar, you can see the rotation. You can also see a few severe thunderstorm and tornado warnings that have gone up. So they are seeing at least a few funnel clouds being produced here by this by Tropical Depression Imelda as it has moved on inland. Now, on to Jerry, which is not the system you see in the middle, but off to the far right. It's not a particularly big system. It's on the smallish side, but it is strengthening. The upper air wind conditions right now are rather favorable, but I want you to notice as you look up well to the north and west, and let's go back to those clouds that are running from the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico and running northeastward. That's the trough that's going to get left behind from Humberto, and eventually Jerry is going to encounter that, which puts it to me in an area that will be not only unfavorable for development, but might actually be a reason for Jerry to weaken once it goes north of the Leewards. It could still get to hurricane strength before that happens, but it's going to have to deal with some of these stronger upper air winds that will be off the East Coast and down to the Bahamas and just north of Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. That's going to hang around for a while. So that is the reason that I think you see the global models really not developing Jerry very much, particularly when it gets up into that position. I'm a little bit intrigued by this area that's down in the Caribbean, only because of its size. The upper air winds are not favorable for development. But the European model actually develops a surface low out of this in the next 24 hours. It doesn't do anything with it. It just gets lost when it gets as it moves westward. But just seeing all this convection here sometimes makes me a little bit suspicious. So just want to keep an eye on things. Every once in a while, you'll get a system that will fight the obvious hostile conditions and find a way to form. I don't know that that's going to happen here. Probably won't. But just the fact that you have all these thunderstorms and this kind of circular-looking cluster just makes me want to watch it. And particularly after what happened yesterday with the Imelda coming out of that cold low that was moving across the Gulf of Mexico, I think it kind of caught everybody by surprise. Here's a tighter view on the floater imagery, which, by the way, you can always find if you go to nhc.noaa.gov and just on their homepage. If you click on data and you pull up the satellite page, there's a link to these floater images. And just to remind everybody, the image, the floater, is because the idea here is to keep the storm as close to the center of the front picture as possible, so that as it moves westward, the geography changes. So that's why you see the latitudes and longitudes shift southward. It's not a change in course of the storm. The storm is, it didn't suddenly jump back eastward. All right, because that if you looked at that without knowing, you think, did this thing just jump eastward? No, it doesn't do that. It's they're moving the geography on the satellite. It helps forecasters out to get a consistent view of the center of the storm. So we've gone through the satellites, we've gone through the radars. The one thing that I didn't load in the pre-show, so I'll do that right now. Just let's review really quick what the Hurricane Center is doing with these things, and then we can, do a little model speculation. So we'll start with Humberto. Not much has changed here with the forecast as it moves away from Bermuda on Thursday. So weather conditions there will be improving, and it kind of turns a little bit more to the north, goes to 40 and 60, which would put it about 700 miles or a little more over 700 miles east of the central New Jersey coast. And then it gradually, it's going to be undergoing a transition over into a post-tropical system. You can start to see a little bit of that maybe going on. If not now, certainly you'll probably start to see it later tonight on the satellite loops as you start to get some of that cooler, drier air getting involved. But it turns it east-northeast again as a strong Atlantic storm that moves across. And perhaps when we get down the road, we'll see what the models do with this. But we've seen some runs bringing a strong post-tropical system into England, Ireland, and Scotland. And we mentioned that yesterday. For those of you in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, of course, sensitive after what happened with Dorian a little less than 2 weeks ago, this is not going to have any material impact on you other than roughing up the ocean a bit. It's passing well to the south and east of Nova Scotia and well to the south and east of even easternmost Newfoundland. So that's good news with regards to our friends that watch from those areas on a regular basis. Now, as far as Jerry is concerned, this is the Hurricane Center's track, strengthening it to a hurricane by tomorrow afternoon. And you see the tropical storm watches that are up for St. Martin and St. Bartholomew and a few of the other islands, the smaller islands in the northern Leewards. But it looks like it should pass far enough north, or at least the core of this will pass far enough north that you'll just probably get into some fringe effects, maybe some tropical storm, borderline tropical storm conditions, assuming that it maintains its rather small size. It doesn't, it doesn't show signs that it's going to expand. It may just remain that kind of smallish size. So you're going to have to be pretty close to the center for anything of consequence to happen. And then weakening it to a tropical storm as the Hurricane Center swings it around to about right to where it gets close to 70 degrees west as a tropical storm and turning northward. Now remember, all of that weakening is going to be caused by those strong upper air winds. So it's a big forecast dilemma looking ahead 4 or 5 days to try to determine the impact of that shear. We could very well have this thing fall apart, or perhaps it might, if the trough is not as deep down the East Coast, it might hold together a bit better, and maybe eventually winds up swinging close to Bermuda as a tropical storm. That would be something to watch for in the longer term. Now, we've got the new GFS. So let's start. We'll start with the Western Atlantic view so that we could take a look at what's happening with Jerry. And I've just scrolled it back here. And we'll take a look at the surface first, and then we'll do a little upper air analysis. So I just want to make sure you guys can see the map, the Tropical Tidbits maps. The date and time are right across the top. So I can I'll open up my little paint box here. I'm glad I found this tool because it makes it easier than having to switch windows, and then I run the risk of forgetting to switch back. So this way I know you guys are seeing what you're supposed to see. So of course we know there's Humberto. This was as of 8 o'clock this evening, the forecast from late this afternoon. So this was the 6-hour forecast. So by the way, for those of you who are using the maps for the first time or maybe aren't too sure, there's your date and time. And the time you see 18Z, that's Greenwich Mean Time, so that's 6 p.m. London time. And for us, 18Z is 2 p.m. Eastern time. So when we go to standard time, it would be 1 p.m. So that number always stays constant. Everybody using weather maps around the world uses Greenwich Mean Time as a reference. So this way everybody's on the same clock. So, hello, Mr. Rayo. Everything all right? Why are you smiling? What's the matter?
I thought I'd open the door.
What?
I thought I'd open the door and then just smile and then close the door.
Oh, okay. There he is. So we're doing Jerry.
I got lonely out
Well, I'm glad you joined. You know, everybody always asks about you. You can pop in anytime.
Yes. Well.
If it's a problem, I'll just throw you out. All right. So we kind of went all through the current weather. So I'm just doing Jerry here, and actually, even before getting started, I was just explaining people who've seen these maps and just want to clarify what they're looking at. So there's your date and time. This is a forecast. It's a 6-hour forecast, and it's valid for midnight Greenwich Mean Time.
That's an hour from now.
Right.
That's
less than half an hour now. So, or 8 o'clock Eastern Time, and since it's midnight Greenwich time, the date changes to September 19th.
Right.
Okay, so this way, it could be a little daunting when they're looking at this saying, what does all that mean? So now you guys know when you read the maps and the date and time. So there's Humberto. If you look on the lower right, we have Jerry, which, by the way, if you see how the GFS handles it, it is quite small. While we have lower pressures here in the Caribbean with that blob that's sitting there, we don't see the model actually showing any kind of low center. And as we move along on the map, which I will do shortly, and hopefully, does that do it? No, there's a way for me to shut off. There we go. So now we're going to move it along. I'm leaving the points up of what's already there. So you can see actually the Jerry moving west-northwest, and Humberto moving north-northeast to north, pulling away from Bermuda. And Jerry looks like it's going to pass pretty far to the north of the Leeward Islands if the GFS has its way, leaving it doesn't really do much in terms of development here, which is not too much of a surprise. And then as we move it northwestward, there's going to be strong upper air winds that are going to impact this. The models are not taking Jerry and making it a hurricane, so it's really indicating that we're going to have strong winds in the upper atmosphere that will probably weaken this as it moves northwestward.
Probably cut it up. Too much shear, even though the water temperatures are probably just perfect for development.
They are quite warm.
Countering that would be the upper level shear. So really, Jerry doesn't have much to work with.
No,
but then it looks like it's starting to wind up a little bit as it gets
right.
out of that.
But then once it gets out of the shear, as it approaches Bermuda,
then we start getting into colder water. Right?
It gets wrapped up a bit and then moves on to the northeast from there. So my general feeling here is, with everything that's going on in the east, in the United States in terms of the upper air, I don't see Jerry being a threat to the U.S.
You know, it's so far. You look at the forecast for Jerry. You look at, of course, Humberto. And the last couple of tropical cyclones, they all seem to be paralleling in one way, shape, or form the eastern seaboard, but nothing really coming on shore or going right along the immediate coastline. Of course, we still have a lot of hurricane season left.
Oh yeah. Well, what you just said makes total sense when you relate when you relate it to the upper air, because the upper air pattern has been basically the same through the summer and through now, where we've been talking about this northern jet just kind of flexing and coming and going. Right. We haven't really seen any big changes in terms of where the troughs are and where the ridges are. So these storms, while they're not taking exact tracks, they are mirroring each other. Right. There's a rhyming nature to them in terms of their tracks.
Admittedly, Dorian was the only one so far to touch the U.S., and that was only for about a half an hour when it was going over the outer banks of North Carolina.
Right.
But again, you're absolutely right. The upper level pattern has been basically the same, and that has been allowing for the. It's like what they always say about at this time of the year for hurricanes, the recurvature, the classic recurvature, and they've been doing a lot of that lately. But again, still a lot of time left if you are a tropical cyclone fan and are hoping for some kind of a more direct hit. It certainly has the tropics have certainly.
But if you do this for a living, you don't. If you do this for a living, you don't want that.
No, exactly.
Okay, and nor do most people. By the way, we should make clear. So here's your upper air. By the way, in the east, you got this. When you've got this trough that extends from Greenland all the way down to off the southeast coast. Northerly winds in the upper atmosphere, which is. Well, we're getting that really beautiful, cool air,
Right.
20s and 30s tonight through much of northern New England and parts of northeastern New York. But you can't bring a storm up the East Coast with an upper air
With
like
that kind
this.
of scenario.
And go ahead, you
And
go.
I said on our 5 o'clock show tonight, on one of the weather hits, I said, as I was showing how cool it's going to get tonight, in some parts of the Hudson Valley, it'll get down near to 40 degrees. And I said, give it another 3 more weeks, and we'll start seeing the first frost advisories going up someplace. But I'm sure people who are looking forward to this weekend of one last fling at summer are probably not hoping for that or waiting for that.
Well, I'm going to take these arrows off for a moment because we're looking here on Friday, and if you take this wrapped up system that is Humberto, and it's also kind of merging a bit with this upper low that's developing off the East Coast, you can see the trough that extends all the way south,
Right.
and this is why Jerry is going to do what it's going to do, which is to recurve and then get impacted by these stronger winds in the upper atmosphere. Here's the trough. I mean, you've got these winds that go all the way down, almost to not quite, but halfway between Bermuda and the Bahamas. You've got westerly winds, and Jerry's moving around the periphery of this upper high, which is not all that strong. So you've got this huge hole right in here, and that's where it's going to go, and it's going to have to deal with these stronger winds at the high levels of the atmosphere, and that's going to take it, to a certain extent, it is going to take it apart. Now that trough eventually lifts out, but of course, at this point, Jerry's going to be turning northeastward, and look what happens, Joe. It's just, here's what it looks like for Thursday and Friday. Trough pulls out, and then early next week,
Nice little ridging, and
then trough on almost the same place that drops in, and yet there's another one that reinforces it as we head to the latter part of next week. So we'll probably get another shot of cool, dry air coming in after the warm weekend that we're going to have this weekend, where we'll be back up into the 80s.
It kind of reminds me in a way of some of the winters of recent years where, we were kind of in a stuck mode where, it's like one after another in terms of storminess. And in this, it's like a repeating pattern, as you just pointed out.
Okay, so let's do we could do our nightly look at the models, do something in the long range that will not be there on the next run. Okay, and I'm referring to, now I'm out at day 6, and here we have this. Now the European and the GFS are both telegraphing another wave coming off the African coast in a couple of days, and they both seem to be developing this and taking it on a west-northwest course. So this is the new run. I'm just looking at it for the first time. So this one, if you want to believe it, heads for the Leewards, goes right between Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic as a major hurricane, and then
Yep.
and then the story ends, and you have to wait for the next chapter.
When is that now? That's October.
That's October 4th.
Oh,
I will remind everybody that if we look at the let's just look at the corresponding upper air pattern, which we don't know is going to be right or not. But if the upper air pattern is the way it is, well, here we go again. Literally taken. The model wants to drop a trough down here, and you've got this sort of west-southwest flow along the east coast. So
well, that means when it gets up to
gets
Hatteras or the Virginia,
it goes
Cape,
out.
We punt.
We punt. So listen, just as much as this is a mystery, so is this.
Yeah.
So, obviously, as you said, we still have a ways to go, quite a ways to go here with respect to tropical activity. The models have been going back and forth on the idea of whether the trough wants to come to the east or not. That's been predicated on the fact that we've seen them try to develop typhoons out in the west. Back about a week or 10 days ago, we were noticing that on the models, and they didn't come to pass. So I just wonder whether that's just an exercise in futility, that we're not going to really see too much, with regards to the troughs in the east. If there's no, you get these typhoons sometimes that they recurve and they head up toward the Gulf of Alaska, and they tend to help to reinforce a trough in the east idea. Well, if the typhoons don't happen, and right now the GFS is not happening because I can't move the map. Hold on, let me try it
Are
again.
we frozen?
No.
Oh, there we go.
Tropical Tidbits was frozen. By the way, also the Pacific side is busy too, with a couple of tropical storms running around. But I'm just taking a look here to see if there's any kind of typhoon action, and there really isn't. But the model seems to want to keep trying to make these troughs in the east on if not on every run, but sometimes on every other run. Just looking at the upper air, you got this. This is late in the period. By the way, you do have, for those of you in the west, you do have some action going on with these troughs coming in. One moving in today. There's another one that follows going in late in the weekend. That drops down into Arizona. That could be why WPC's got 10-inch plus rains down there.
Yeah.
And then yet another trough later next week, a rather deep one that comes into the west around day 10 or 11, assuming that's right, which would put a ridge in the east. And then gradually you start to see the troughing shift to the east coast. This is the long-range fantasy that the model has. We'll see if that winds up being anything resembling reality, which we at this point don't know.
How much did you say for Arizona? 10 inches they've got? Or?
Look at what WPC did for the next 7 days.
Wow.
With all that action in the west.
Good Lord.
Hold on. Yeah, right in
Yeah.
there. I mean,
Oh.
that's like that's 5 inches plus. And of course, they're going for another. They went for another 5 to 10 inches for East Texas and westernmost Louisiana
Courtesy
from
of
Imelda.
Imelda.
But Imelda's already dumped over a foot of rain in some places. You're talking about 2 feet of rain or more, and some of that moisture is going to get up further to the north. But look how bone dry we are. We're going to be less than 1/10 of an inch being indicated, 1/10 to 1/4.
All that rain that supposedly is forecast for eastern Kansas and northern sections of Missouri and on
Yeah.
into parts of Illinois. Wow.
I think some of that is that tropical moisture from Imelda just getting drawn northward, because it really has no place to go but to just kind of crawl northward. So we're going to go to the chat board. We both have some time, so we can we'll discuss. If those of you who have any questions, we've got 100 folks watching right now. That's a nice little crowd. Monet Poré. Oh, something about your water bill being too high. It is bone dry in the east down to the mid-Atlantic, that's for sure. My lawn's fried. After a summer where we've had a fair amount of thunderstorms, it's been really dry here. Joyce Mack says this lack of rain killing her flowers too early. The rain we've had has come so fast and furious it just runs off and nothing gets watered.
Well, I'm happy in a way that we're in this dry spell because my lawn this year had a lot of crabgrass, and at times it was growing. I said to myself, "My goodness, I only mowed the darn thing like three days ago, and already it looks like it's shaggy and needs to be done again." But the last week or so, it's been so dry now. The only reason I'm going to probably do it tomorrow morning is the leaves are coming down now, so it's time to start vacuuming and mulching, so to speak.
Mine went all crabgrass and nothing's growing, so I'm just leaving it alone. Let's see.
Joe Rayo, do you feel Orange County will hit the 30s in the morning? I'll tell you what, the lowest temperature I went for was 40 in the valley spots, and especially I mentioned north of I-84, the I-84 corridor, but I would not rule it out that one or two places might, if it stays crystal clear all night with no wind, it could challenge dipping briefly into the upper 30s.
Linda Hernandez wants to know, why are all the hurricanes taking the same path this year and curving out to sea?
Didn't we just say
And
that?
we just, well, she may have jumped on
Oh,
late. But because of where the upper trough is along the east, it's just off the east coast. So we have, right now, we have northerly winds blowing up and down the east coast. Follow the satellite loop. In fact, let's go back. I'm going to bring up, Joe, the upper air water vapor imagery, which is one of the more exciting loops that's out there. So hang on one second. And I think, Linda, this is going to help answer your question. And then we're going to get to Bobby Livingston, who's already got the winter all figured out.
Really? Like that guy we were looking at the other day?
But I would just ask you why. So while we're doing this, Bobby, why don't you put on in the chat why you said what you said? Then I'm going to go back and tell Joe what you did say, and then we'll discuss it. So here we go. Where is it? Upper level water vapor, Linda. Now we'll take a look at this. Now watch. I'll put a few more frames because you can't really see it in 12 frames. So I'll put 84 frames on here. So you'll see the flow through most of the day. So a couple of things to notice here on this water vapor imagery is the fact that I got to erase that. So if you look at, you see how everything in New England is down to Florida, everything is moving north to south in the upper atmosphere, okay? So you can't have something come up the coast against that flow. Meanwhile, there's a trough that goes way up in the atmosphere, goes all the way down into the Florida Straits, and this is pushing Humberto on up to the northeast. Mm-hmm. And you're seeing repeat performances of this. Now with Dorian, the trough was further west. So you had Dorian hug the coastline before it moved out from from the Outer Banks of North Carolina toward Nova Scotia. It went up this way. But we were protected here in the Northeast because the flow was basically westerly or west-southwesterly. But here, the trough is further east, and with Jerry, the trough is going to be further east because you're going to have the leftover trough from Humberto. So, if you're going to see something in the East Coast, okay, you get a trough like this, you basically want it like this, so that you've got southerly winds up the East Coast, and that your storm moves up northward. But we don't have anything like that.
Yeah, but don't give nature any ideas, Joe.
Oh, you mean like as if they read my maps? Gotcha. So that's the reason why they're and we've just basically been in a pattern for a couple of months where this has been a repeat performance, just one after another after another. See, and I forgot to put the darn thing full screen. Here you go. So here you go. You see it right here. You see the bottom of that trough that's down in the Florida Straits. So and everything on the East Coast is going north to south, and the bottom of that trough, you've got Humberto moving to the northeast.
That's kind of amazing. You don't normally see, something like the bottom of a trough reaching as far south as it is now, or even as far south, let's say, as Lake Okeechobee. It's still rather early in the season for you to see something like that.
Okay, so let's go back to the chat board. So Bobby Livingston, did you take my... Okay, he says, we will have a unique setup come early winter around December.
Uh-huh.
There will be most likely, a large snowstorm affecting the Ohio Valley, Mid-Atlantic, and possibly the Northeast.
Well, is he implying that perhaps there's a big cold high over the Northeast and that the storm is going to get shunted?
Well, he says, it's a lot for me to discuss, but we have time. But some of the main players will be a positive PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, and you're not meaning the PNA here, you're the Pacific North America Index, but you're saying a positive PDO and a negative NAO in place with a more active subtropical jet in early winter. Because I mean, here's the thing.
I love how these people, they have it all figured out.
Right.
It's so complex, but they all put it all together and say, okay, this is what we're going to do.
The thing is, I will just point out that we've spent much of the summer with a negative NAO, And as a few people have observed in the weather world, that in the last number of years we've had negative NAOs in the summer months and into early fall, and then as soon as we get into mid and late fall, the negative North Atlantic oscillation, the blocking pattern in the North Atlantic disappears.
Okay.
And you don't see it for the whole winter, except for maybe sporadic appearances that last. So I would just ask, why is it different this year? Why is it different going into this winter than it has been over the past 5 or 6 winters, where the NAO makes brief appearances and then is almost non-existent through the winter months? I would just put that out there. Okay. This year will be different, he says. All right, look, I'm going to hold you to this, Bobby. Okay. It's September 18th, so 2.5 months from now, I'm going to hold you to this.
Now think about how weird this past winter was. We had that unusually early snowfall in mid-November, and then December was one of the warmest Decembers on record, and in spite of that, there was a major snowstorm over the southeastern United States,
right,
and then into the Carolinas.
Well, David Schwartz points out from that one, we had a negative North Atlantic oscillation was so darn strong,
right,
that it suppressed everything to the south.
Right.
Go ahead.
And January turned out to be very mild, except for the final week when all of a sudden it turned sharply colder. And then it looked like February into early March, very wintry for our area, with cold and snow.
Speaking of cold and snow, our friend Alfred Phillips, who will have increasing cold and some snow up on the north slope of Alaska. They don't get a whole lot of snow there on the north slope.
Alfred, the old saying, it gets too cold for snow.
Yes, but he is our regular from probably our northernmost regular viewer of my YouTube channel. Oh, and by the way, this is a good time. Mr. Rayo has a YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed to it, you need to subscribe, because we have to get him to 1,000 subscribers. So he is at, if you just YouTube search Joe Rayo Weather, okay? And I will put the link up in the chat for those of you who are search challenged.
Slowly but surely, we're picking up people, and slowly but surely we're developing something on that YouTube channel.
Well, you're up to 228.
228.
You're a quarter of the way to Aunt Sally's pecan pralines.
Almost a quarter.
And there's the link to Joe Rayo's YouTube channel. So when we get him up to speed, you can watch my live stream, and then when I'm done, you can watch his live stream.
I have a question to all of our viewers, all of your viewers. I did a piece when I was at News 12. It was a 2-part series called Climate of Concern. And I got a lot of people very, very upset, because one of the people I interviewed was a gentleman by the name of Jim Witt. I asked Jim, and he's been studying weather patterns for over 50 years now. He's even gotten an award from the American Meteorological Society. And when I asked him, how come 40 years ago the very reputable climate scientists were saying we were heading for an ice age, and now they're saying that we're heading for global warming or climate change. I said, why is that, Jim? And Jim said what probably irritated the heck out of all of the people out there who are fighting against global warming and fighting against climate change. He said, they don't know, Joe. That's all he had to say was, because they don't know, Joe. And you wouldn't believe.
But there's a long. I said from the beginning. I was talking to you about this before I came out here to do the live stream. I put a link up in the chat. There's a long history of apocalyptic predictions,
right,
in not just in climate, but in some other related things,
right,
that none of them have come to pass.
Well, people got very upset when he said that. So much so that there were actually people who were saying that they were going to make an honest attempt to get me fired, or have my lose my job and all of my affiliations. Because how could you possibly put somebody like that on the air to say something?
Well, because this is what zealots do, Joe.
And
if you don't look, I've taken a very Switzerland type view in all of this, because my feeling is what I do here is weather and meteorology. I'm not a climatologist. It's not, I'm no expert when it comes to that, to the long range and the statistics and how to handle them and what they mean and what they don't mean. I leave that for others. I just do my weather stuff. I try to forecast, and I don't want to get involved in any of the other, in all the weather hysterics that go on. The epic drizzle, the epic snowstorms, the tornadoes that have never happened before, the hurricanes. There's all this weather hysterics that go on all the time. I don't want any part of it, because the people that are orchestrating those weather hysterics are doing it for their own, to promote their own agendas and for their own reasons. They will be angry with you because you're basically standing up and saying, I don't care about what you're saying.
Right.
So that makes you a bad person.
Well, I've said time and time again to all the people who got very upset, I said, I'm playing the role of the reporter. I interviewed several experts. I interviewed Jeff Tung, who was the science officer at the National Weather Service in Upton, out asking him, and we interviewed the gentleman who takes the climatological data every day at the Mohonk Mountain House, and he said that 2012 was the hottest year on record, and they go all the way back to like the late 1800s.
Right.
And I thought I was a fair and balanced report, except when Jim Witt said, referring to the fact of why it was they were saying we were on our way to an ice age, and now we're saying it's climate change. They don't know, Joe. that was it. That just put everything over.
Well,
I'm only saying this because I'm considering putting this report on my channel, and I'm thinking about, am I asking for trouble if I put this on on the channel from people who are would get very, very.
What are they going to do to you?
Well,
get you fired?
Well,
we're getting fired anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Or put a disclaimer or something like that.
You don't need a disclaimer.
These are not my opinions.
Doesn't matter if the person watching it doesn't. If they can't understand, it is not. I feel it's not my job to handhold every person in terms of when I put something out there. They should understand that from the onset. You're not there to you're giving what you are trying to do is give a balanced a report of what's going on, which is something you rarely see anywhere anymore about just about any subject matter. You know what? They're going to take it wrong anyway.
In part one, we had Governor Andrew Cuomo, a news conference right after Sandy,
right,
where Lower Manhattan was flooded and places that were hit hard. And he made the comment, when they were first building New York,
I knew he was going to go into
when they first built New York, we didn't have hurricanes.
No, we never did.
We didn't have floods.
We
had nothing like this. And then we actually found newsreel footage of Donna in 1960 showing Brooklyn getting flooded out or whatever like that. And the thing I think that Governor Cuomo was trying to suggest was that now that we're into global warming or climate change or whatever you want to call it, that we're going to see more frequent hurricanes and tropical systems hit the tri-state area, because now we're seeing, and then we asked Jeff Tung at the National Weather Service, and Jeff Tung said that has nothing to do with frequency and the occurrence of storm. He said they'll be stronger, but in terms of frequency, in terms of their occurrence, that's not going to be the case. That has nothing to do with that. But it's like amazing. So that's why I'm debating. I've got that. I've thought about it for the last 2 weeks, saying, should I put this up there? Should I put it on the channel?
Put it on. I would put it on. It's your channel.
And then I'll forward all of the complaints to you.
It's your channel. As Abbott said to Costello when they was trying to have the birthday party and he wanted to turn the radio on.
Right.
Turn it on.
Turn
You pay rent, don't you? Chad Mabslayer.
Order something small.
Right, I'll have a small steak. CPC has above average early winter temps for the entire U.S., but every YouTube channel prediction has below average temps and massive snow, as always happens this time of year. Absolutely correct, Chad. There's no other forecast you will ever see for a winter forecast that isn't below normal temps and above normal snowfall.
These people with
in the eastern part of the United States.
These people with these websites and making projections about bitter cold and heavy snow, and And in fact, the one I was showing you yesterday, he said, we're going to have Miller A and Miller B nor'easters and blizzard conditions and cold weather in the Northeast. I mean, you're not going to attract anybody if you say, well, it's going to be a semi-decent, there's no big deal this winter. It's going to be warm or more wet rain and that kind of. It's crazy. You're absolutely correct.
David Schwartz says his take is it's a risk we cannot afford. I think that's we can argue that point. We will all be better off without extra CO2 for pollution. Look, of course, we all want a clean atmosphere, and I'm totally supportive of that. But this needs to be done with intelligence, and it needs to be done without hysterics, because it is as much about the transfer of economic wealth from one nation to another as it's more really about that than it actually is about cleaning things up. But no, look, obviously, less pollution makes for a better world.
Right.
No one disputes that.
Right.
But this has all become embroiled in a huge political battle that as much as you're seeing politicians using that as a way to whip the crowds up to get to vote for me, climate change, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of undercurrents going on that you need to take a step back and you have to look at that.
When we get into this imbroglio with the politicians up on the debate floor, and they start asking questions about global warming, they start spurting and say, well, we should do this and that, global warming, climate change, whatever like that. I wish one of the moderators would say, excuse me, he said, now have you done a specific study on your own about this, and have you looked at the problem and have made it case? And of course, naturally, the politician will say, well, I haven't done it, but I'm quoting now reputable scientists, but the thing is, if the reputable scientists said something other than that, these politicians would be like parrots and they would quote something different. It's
Peter Bondarenko wants to know, I guess he's new to the channel. Welcome, Peter. This is the first time I've seen you on the chat. Who you are. So you're Joe. He's Joe Rayo.
No,
he's not on the show every night. He does join me from time to time.
I just happened to walk into the room. I'm cleaning the floors here. My broom is over there. So I'll be doing that probably after November 15th.
You'll like this one. Mark G says, what about a Miller Z storm? Is that due to climate change? It's Miller time. Bottom line, says Joyce Mack, we have one Earth to live on. Got to take care of it the best we can. My great-grandmother always said, can you make one of those? Then you have... Can you make one of those? Then you have no business destroying. You see, now Joyce kind of put it in a very sensible sort of way,
right?
And I agree with that, because it's when you get all the politics and all the screaming around that it's just a big turnoff for me, and I think it's a big turnoff for a lot of people.
What Jim Witt said about why they said ice 40 years ago, now they're saying global warming, and he said they really don't know. Here's the thing: the PDO.
Mm-hmm. The Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which is due to change very soon.
But you ask climate scientists, well, why does it do that? Why does the Pacific Ocean spend 30 or 40 years in an unusually cool pattern, and all of a sudden it flips over and it gets very warm, and then flips back? You ask any of them, they will never be able to give you a definitive answer, because they, to quote Jim, they don't know. They watch, they observe, we know that there's a cycle going on or whatever, and we assume that we're going to see it flip in the next few years or whatever, but they just simply don't know. Why does it do that?
Well, that's a good... We don't. There's so much we don't know. There is so much we don't know. And the thing is, so if in 1975, and we're talking about articles in the New York Times and Time Magazine, they're not showing up in some obscure... some obscure newspaper or journal that no one reads, or maybe it's only read by a handful of academics. We had mainstream press coming on with all these things, including, one on population control, where you had a quote-unquote reputable scientist advocating that we put sterilization products inside the water supply and in food staples to prevent people from having children because of this great famine that was going to begin in 1975 and wipe out 80% of the Earth's population by the year 2000.
Right.
Guess what? didn't happen. So I would just say this, and many of us will probably not be around to get the answer to this question, although I plan to be here in 40 years.
Good luck.
Yes. But if what we're seeing now, a lot of these warming statements, the warming views, started appearing as early as the mid-1980s. So from the mid-1970s to the mid-1980s, you went from article after article in the mainstream press of the apocalypse of the next ice age to the beginnings of article after article of the Earth's temperature reaching the boiling point. And I just wonder, because you had a Pacific decadal oscillation that occurred in 1979, and if this is a every 40-ish year phenomena, it's now 2019, so we're at 40 years. So if we have that decadal oscillation, 40 years from now, are we going to be writing the opposite of what we're writing, what's being written now?
I've often thought that by the mid-21st century, again, 2050 or 2060, that people will be looking back at us and saying, isn't that funny? They actually thought that we were on our way toward a warming cycle, and meanwhile, it's not totally out of question. And I just thought of something from you mentioned 1975. At that time, I was just a sophomore in college. One of our professors that I think you had him, I certainly had him, Professor Jerome Spar, who taught not only at City College, but also at NYU, and is a very highly reputable meteorologist, especially back then.
Yes.
He made an appearance. They were talking about climate and what it means to us in the foreseeable future. And it was during that crazy period when everybody thought we were heading for an ice age. And they had him on the McNeil-Lehrer report on PBS. And he was talking about how we may be that there's a short-term cycle that suggests warming, but then we're in a long-term cycle where it's cold. And it basically not really saying much of anything, leaning from one direction to another direction. Like, you know who they teamed him up with as a little bit of comic relief? Professor Irwin Corey. Remember him? He used to talk like in double talk. He made believe that he knew everything. I don't know how many of you remember this guy. And I remember when the show came to an end, here's Robert McNeil saying, well, thank you very much, Professor Spar, and thank you very much for Professor Corey for expounding. And Professor Irwin Corey was just like, again, talking double talk. And here now they're rolling the credits, and Professor Irwin Corey turns to Professor Spar, and he's one like this, and Professor Spar's just like sitting there with this like smirk on his face.
Professor Spar was a very mild-mannered kind of guy,
right.
Very low-key.
Right.
And he wasn't one to get excited or passionate. He never raised his voice. A good man, and I could see it. I could see him just kind of sitting there.
I was like on the floor, Joe. You had to see, because in those days on the McNeil-Lehrer report, you'd see the people being interviewed and McNeil and Lehrer, and they would lower the lights so that you almost could see just a silhouette of the people. And here now is like Professor Spar, and of course you and I had him, and he's just sitting there and not saying a word, and here's Professor Irwin Corey explaining his thoughts about the climate cycle and meteorology or whatever. It was very, very funny. And by the way, again, in 75, Professor Spar was advocating, it looks like we were on our way toward a colder than normal or much. And now we're in the warm cycle again, so...
David Schwartz says, when did El Nino become a thing? And he mentions it's 82 and 83. That's probably the first time I started reading it.
I think that was the first time I heard about El Nino was 82, 83. And the funny thing about that was we had the megalopolitan snowstorm in February of 1983, which you missed.
I did miss it.
I kept thinking about you all that night. It was a Friday night.
Well, I missed that one. I missed the April blizzard. I had just moved. I literally 3 weeks before I had just moved to Corpus Christi to work my first TV on-air job at KRIS-TV in Corpus Christi, Texas. I missed that one. I missed the 83 blizzard.
And the 83 blizzard came in a winter where some of the warmest winter temperatures had been recorded. We were like way above normal, but then all of a sudden, this cold high just happened to drift like a balloon out of Canada across the Northeast. At the same time, we had this little wave of low pressure coming up the coast. Boom, bingo. And we ended up with 1 to 2 feet of snow from Washington to Boston. And that was the one and only. And the funny thing was, if you were to ask anybody, especially in the New York area, what did you think of the winter of 82, 83? What did you think? It turned out to be a very warm winter overall, but that one big snowstorm.
Yeah, that was it. It was like a 3-week window.
Yeah. Oh, well, it was a terrible
It was a
winter.
reverse January thaw.
Right.
Basically.
Exactly.
Michael Azera. By the way, I'm going to update Jerry and Humberto in a moment. Michael Azera says, "What caused the East Coast hurricanes in the 50s? Because a lot of the storms in the 50s came up the East Coast,
Right.
And multiple storms, 3 and 6 weeks that either made landfall here or came very
I think
close.
one of them was Diana.
Connie, Diane,
Diana,
Carol,
Carol.
Edna, Inez,
Right.
and there's a few more in there in the mix.
Which one was the one that devastated Toronto? Was that Inez, I think?
Hazel?
Hazel. I'm thinking about
Shirley Booth. Shirley Booth, by the way, one of the few artists, one of the few actors to hit the triple, which is to win an Oscar, an Emmy, and a Tony.
Yeah.
Not many have done that.
Right.
Very few have done that.
Let me ask you the question, since you're so multi-talented. What movie did she do that she won her Oscar?
Oh, Come Back, Little
Come Back,
Sheba.
Sheba. Right.
And who was the male lead in that movie?
That I see. Who knows everything?
Burt Lancaster.
That's right, Burt Lancaster.
Burt Lancaster. It's a very hard movie to watch. It's because of the subject matter and it's and the characters, because you have sympathy for the characters a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Shirley Booth was just insanely talented.
I remember watching that movie. They had it on Saturday night at the movies. Remember that on NBC? They used to have, they'd show a full-length movie, and they showed Come Back, Little Sheba, and I got very upset when Burt Lancaster was yelling and screaming at Shirley Booth.
Well, he played an alcoholic doctor.
Right, but I mean, how could I said to my grandmother? Now remember, I was only 12 years old or whatever.
Right.
I turned to my grandma and I said, "How could he say that about Hazel?"
Thank God we have Turner Classic Movies, because that's my. I'm unlike a lot of people who. If you ask me about most of the movies that happened after about 1980 or 1990 in particular, I've seen very few of them. There was a time where I used to just go to the movies all the time.
Right.
But if it's a classic movie, particularly if they occurred from 1960 and before, I've probably seen it. If not, I put it on my list of movies to see. I just love watching old black and white movies.
You know what the scariest movie, my favorite, but also the scariest movie I ever saw, and I still consider it number one. In fact, if you ever come to my house and come into my home office, here's the door, you open up to the office. On the back of the door that I can see from inside my office, my son got me the, what do you call it, the poster, the promotion.
What, for Godzilla?
For whatever that, no. Failsafe. With Failsafe, Henry Fonda played the president.
Yes! Oh, that's a great movie.
Larry Hagman played the Russian translator.
That scene, Larry Hagman's scene in there with Henry Fonda was...
I don't know why he didn't
and
win.
Larry Hagman talked about having to do that scene with Henry Fonda was
right.
was brutal on him personally.
Right.
But Hagman should have gotten an Oscar nomination.
I think he should have gotten an Oscar nomination too.
That Failsafe is a great movie. If you've never seen it.
If you've never seen it, basically the gist of the story is that a mistake occurs and American bombers with 20 megaton hydrogen bombs are sent on a mission to bomb Moscow. It's all a mistake. And much of the movie is Henry Fonda and the United States trying to avoid that, trying to actually help Russia to shoot those bombers down before they get to Moscow. And finally, Henry Fonda says, well, if they hit Moscow and it's our mistake or whatever, then we have to reciprocate by having one of our own bombers drop a bomb on New York City. And ground zero, by the way, in that movie was the Empire State Building.
Right.
And scary.
Well, we won't give it away.
And the biggest thing, the biggest contrast is one of the persons who plays a very dramatic and key role in this movie was never considered to be a dramatic actor. In fact, if anything, he was always thought to be a comedic actor, a funny comedic
Oh,
actor.
Dom DeLuise.
Dom DeLuise.
Yes.
Dom DeLuise. If you ever want to see Dom DeLuise play a serious role, this was the movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
It's a great movie.
Okay, so with Tropical Storm Jerry, Anthony Orr reminding me earlier that the advisory was in. So if you're still on, Anthony, thank you. I did see your message, but we were so wrapped up in our conversation, I didn't get a chance to respond. So Jerry's at 15.2, 51.2, 715 miles east of the Leewards. They left the winds alone, which is not a surprise. 60 miles an hour, moving west-northwest at 15. And there have been additional tropical storm watches in effect that have been additional tropical storm watches that have been issued. So we've had the watch up for St. Martin and St. Bartholomew. Now we can add Barbuda, Anguilla, Saba, and St. Eustatius. I think that's Eustatius, how you say that.
Eustatius,
Eustatius.
yeah.
So those are the new, those are the watches now. They have been extended for the Leewards and for Humberto, which is still a Category 3, top winds 120 miles an hour, and a pressure of 952 millibars because the plane is on the way there now. 33.465 or about 75 miles to the north of Bermuda. So it's just about made its closest pass to Bermuda. 120 on the winds, east-northeast at 20 miles an hour, so it's moving faster. 952 millibars, 28.12 inches. And I did have an ob from Bermuda before. They were 64 gusting to 82. And Hamilton right now has gone west. West sustained at 73, gusting to 109. Oh my. Can you imagine that?
I was in Bermuda just a couple of months ago.
Gusting to 109 miles an hour in Bermuda.
Wow.
That's insane. All right. I guess
Rocking and rolling on Front Street.
That's yes. Okay. Time to go. So back to normal schedule tomorrow as usual, which means you will get weather in 5 from me in the morning. Website posts in between, and we'll have our live stream here tomorrow night at 7 o'clock Eastern time. So thanks everybody for being here tonight. Really appreciate it. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
You don't have to wait for me to ask you. You can always pop in.
I watched Jeopardy. I was savoring the Met victory tonight, and then I said, let me go in.
Well,
crashes his YouTube party.
Real fast. Let me just look, see if there's a recon, really fast. Nope, he's still not quite there yet. Halfway between Florida and Bermuda is where the plane is at the moment. So they'll probably have a new pressure for the Hurricane Center will probably have a new pressure for the 11 o'clock advisory. All right, have a great night, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.